The storm hit without warning, the kind that rattles windows and sends trees bending in the wind. I didn't fight back when my dad screamed at me, not even when he called me a failure. I just grabbed my jacket and walked into the downpour. But hours later, sirens filled the air, and the sound of them made my stomach drop. My dad's face turned ghostly when he saw me standing in the doorway, drenched but alive. 17 years old and standing at the crossroads of adulthood, the narrator finds himself kicked out of his home after a heated argument with his father. A misunderstanding, one that should have been easily forgotten, has instead spiraled into something much darker. Or will it break him? The sound of the rain began softly, almost like a whisper against the windows. I watched the droplets race down the glass, tracing each other's path, unable to decide which one would reach the bottom first. It was a quiet storm, the kind that fills the air with tension before the thunder even begins. Inside, the house felt small, like the walls were closing in, pushing everything I couldn't say into the corners, away from the light. UK. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room colder than usual. The rain outside wasn't enough to explain the chill. The argument had already started, but it wasn't the first time. My father's voice had been rising, thick with frustration, his words sharp and jagged. I didn't even know what it was about. Something small, something insignificant. I never did, but it never took much for him to explode. My mother stood at the doorway, silent, her back to me. She always kept her distance when things got loud, always looked away when the storm hit. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I wasn't sure if it was because she didn't want to see me, or because she couldn't bear to see what was happening. Either way, it felt like she had already checked out. The floor creaked as I shifted, pulling my knees up to my chest. My father's voice cut through the thick silence, getting louder, angrier. "You're nothing but a farrier to this family." His words slammed into me, sharp and final, echoing through the walls of my head. It didn't matter if the words were meant for me or not. They always felt like they were. I hadn't fought back. I couldn't. Every argument, every scream felt like it chipped away at something inside me, something I couldn't name. Maybe I had stopped fighting a long time ago. Maybe in that moment I didn't even want to anymore. The door to my room swung open suddenly, and my father's silhouette filled the doorway. His face was red, his eyes wide with fury, as though I had just committed the gravest sin. "Get out," he barked, his voice seething with anger. Now I didn't move. The words were so familiar. They had been said before, but this time they felt different. The rain outside started to pound harder against the windows, as if in sync with the growing intensity of the storm inside. I could hear the wind pick up, the branches scraping against the walls like they were trying to get inside, too. "Ka-ka-shu-cha, stok-na-sapand. Don't you dare just sit there like you're innocent," he continued, his voice cracking. The tension in the room was palpable, like the air itself was thick with the weight of things unsaid. My mother's figure remained in the doorway, silent, still. The only sound was the relentless tap of the rain. Kang. I stood up slowly, the room spinning around me. I didn't want to look at him. I didn't want to feel the weight of his anger anymore. I turned toward the door, feeling the cold air from the hallway seep into my skin, and walked past him, avoiding his gaze. It was too much, and I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Not tonight. Not with the storm outside growing louder, as if it wanted to drown out everything. Gain Fran Bunderwin Cav Fang Con Spror, and Stinchen. As I reached the front door, I paused. My mother's gaze was still averted, her eyes on the floor. She didn't move, didn't speak, the words stuck in my throat. I wanted to scream, to ask why she wasn't stopping him, why she was letting it happen again. But the silence she carried was louder than anything I could say. I couldn't get the words out. The rain hit me as soon as I stepped outside, sharp and cold. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, but it didn't make any difference. My skin was already soaked, and the chill of the night seeped into my bones. The storm raged around me, but it felt like the least of my concerns. The world outside was blurry, the streetlights casting weak orange halos in the downpour. The pavement was slick, and each step I took seemed to carry more weight than the last. I walked down the driveway, the house growing smaller and smaller behind me. I didn't look back. The storm felt like a wall between me and the life I had known, a wall I couldn't cross. The house, my father, my mother, they all seemed to recede into the distance, until they were nothing but silhouettes, shadows in the rain. I felt the sting of my father's words on the back of my neck, the sharpness of them still lingering. A failure to this family. His words echoed in my head like they had been carved into my skin, and I wondered if I would ever be able to wash them away. The streets were empty, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the storm. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. The wind howled around me, pushing me forward as I walked without a destination. My thoughts were muddled, confused, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. It didn't matter what had started this argument, what it was even about anymore. All I could think about was the fact that I was walking away, and no matter how far I walked, the storm would follow me. It would follow me until I figured out where to go next. Nekken menkave reshwal de neferder. I walked for what felt like hours, but time seemed to have lost all meaning. The streets blurred together, the rain battering my face like a constant reminder of everything I couldn't escape. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. My legs were tired and my feet were numb, but I didn't stop. As I turned a corner, I found myself standing under an old street lamp, its light flickering faintly, casting a small circle of light on the ground. I stopped there, my chest heaving with each breath, my heart beating louder than the storm. The city seemed still, empty, and for the first time I wondered if I was truly alone. I couldn't go back. Not now, not after what had been said. The storm wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside me, too. I stood there, under the flickering light, trying to catch my breath. The rain had slowed, but the weight of it still hung in the air. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't stay in that house. Not when the storm inside had nowhere to go. The rain hit me like 1,000 small needles, cold and sharp against my skin. It wasn't a storm anymore. It was the kind of downpour that felt like it was trying to wash everything away. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to keep moving. The streetlights flickered ahead, casting a dull yellow glow that made everything feel distant, like a memory I couldn't reach. I kept walking, my shoes sloshing through puddles, my jacket soaked through. The night was too quiet, too still. It felt like the whole world was waiting for something, but I couldn't figure out what. And I could feel the sting of the rain in my eyes, but I didn't care. The cold seeped through my clothes, but it wasn't the chill that made my bones ache. It was the silence between me and the world, the emptiness of the streets, the distance from everything familiar. Every step I took was heavier than the last. My father's words still echoed in my head. You're nothing but a failure to this family. You're nothing but a failure to failure, but a failure to this family. They weren't new, not really, but tonight they had stung harder than usual. The storm outside seemed to match the storm inside me. Endless and unforgiving. I'd left without a fight. And I should have said something, anything, but I didn't. I just walked. And now I was here, walking through streets I used to know like they were strangers. It was late. The city felt deserted. There was no one around. The only sound was the rush of rain hitting the pavement, the quiet hiss of tires on wet roads in the distance. But even that seemed far away, like it belonged to someone else. It had been hours since I left, but it felt like time had stopped. My fingers clenched into fists, but there was no release. Just the pounding of rain against my skin, against everything I had left of the life I once knew. I passed the corner store, the neon sign flickering weakly through the downpour. It was the same sign that had been there for as long as I could remember. I used to stop there on the way home from school. I could still remember the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery inside. Now it didn't feel like mine anymore. The rain blurred everything, making the store's windows look like they were covered in fog, separating me from a past I couldn't touch. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, feeling the dampness of it clinging to my skin. The streets stretched on, winding through the city like an endless loop. Familiar places that should have brought me comfort felt foreign now. The diner down the block, the park bench near the corner, even the old library with the peeling paint. They were all just remnants of a life I wasn't part of anymore. I was walking through a ghost town of my own making, a place where I didn't belong. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, but the pace was slow, like I was dragging it behind me. The distance between me and my father felt like miles, but it wasn't just the physical space. The silence between us, the words unsaid, the anger unspoken, it had settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I hadn't meant to leave like that, but I hadn't known what else to do. What was I supposed to say? How could I make him understand? The further I walked, the more my thoughts tangled, pulling me in every direction. I passed more familiar places, more memories that didn't feel like mine anymore. Lager Sakurs in the Combler Mac. I didn't need to move, Bersama Cement. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to move, away. I stopped in front of the old park bench where I used to sit and watch the cars go by. It was empty now, the playground silent, the swings swaying lightly in the wind, as if no one had touched them in years. The streetlights above flickered in time with my thoughts, their weak light casting long, jagged shadows on the wet pavement. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty bench. My chest was tight, my breath shallow. I had no idea how long I'd been standing there, but it felt like I had been frozen in time. The world had kept moving, but I had stayed still, caught in the space between what had happened and what was yet to come. The rain started to ease, but the weight of everything, the argument, the silence, the way my father had looked at me as I left, it pressed down on me, heavier than the storm itself. I wanted to scream, to shout, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. And I took a step forward, the ground slick beneath my feet, but my mind was stuck on the past. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had said those words, "You're nothing but a failure to this family," and how nothing but the failure to this family, and how, even now, they felt like they had been branded into my skin. He was my father. Why couldn't he see what this was doing to me? Why couldn't he see the hurt behind my silence? I turned my face up to the sky, hoping the rain would wash it all away, but it didn't. The sting of his words remained, a shadow that clung to me no matter how far I walked. I walked on, my feet moving by themselves, no destination in mind, just the need to keep going. The streetlights blurred as I passed under them, the rain reflecting in puddles on the sidewalk. I wanted to go home. I wanted to go back and have everything be normal again, but I knew that wasn't possible. Not after what had been said, not after what I had done. I reached a corner and stopped. The night felt endless, the world ahead of me empty. My father's voice echoed in my mind again, louder now, as if it was trying to drown out everything else. The city seemed quieter now, the storm easing into a light drizzle. But it didn't feel like relief. It felt like something heavier was settling in, a silence I didn't know how to break. And I could feel my chest tighten again, my throat closing, and I realized I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from everything I had known, everything that had once made sense, and I wasn't sure I could find my way back. I turned the corner and kept walking, the rain now just a soft drizzle, but the weight of the night still heavy on my shoulders. The wind howled above me, and the rain beat against my face in relentless sheets. It was the kind of storm that seemed like it might never end, like the world was being torn apart and stitched back together again in one wild, chaotic breath. I pulled the collar of my jacket up, but the cold still slipped in, sharp and unforgiving. My shoes splashed through puddles as I walked under an old bridge, the sound of the rain crashing above me muffled by the concrete. I didn't stop. There was nowhere to go, no one to turn to, just the sound of the storm and the weight of everything pressing down on me. The bridge was a strange comfort, an unlikely shelter from the storm. The noise of the rain above me was louder here, the cold air settling into my bones. I hadn't realized how much the storm had soaked into my skin until I stood still, shivering with exhaustion. My fingers ached, stiff from the cold, and my face was numb. I looked out into the dark streets, empty, all the familiar landmarks swallowed by the night. I hadn't expected to be here, I hadn't expected to leave. But the words from earlier were still circling in my head, like they were caught in an echo I couldn't escape. Hori were pointing the side. You're nothing but a failure to this family. The wind carried them back to me, pushing them into my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. Ikeres and Dashtikostion. I didn't know how long I'd been walking. Hours, days? Time had blurred after the argument. After I stepped out into the storm with nothing but the jacket on my back and the bitter taste of anger on my tongue. I thought walking would clear my mind, but it only left more space for the questions that lingered. Why had he said it? What did it mean? And why couldn't I turn back? The silence of the night around me felt heavy, like the whole world was waiting for something and I didn't know what it was. I leaned against the rough stone wall of the bridge, my arms wrapped tightly around myself for warmth. Wait! My breath came in shallow bursts, the cold air freezing my chest with each inhale. I should have gone somewhere, anywhere, but I hadn't. I just kept walking. My eyes followed the water rushing under the bridge, its dark surface reflecting the faint light from the street lamps. There was no sound here except the storm and the river. And then, as if the silence itself had shattered, the phone in my pocket vibrated. The sound cut through the night, sharp and foreign. I pulled it out, staring at the screen for a long moment. I didn't recognize the number. The phone rang again, the sound echoing in the stillness. Something tugged at my chest, a feeling I couldn't place, but it urged me to pick up. I pressed the phone to my ear, my hand shaking more than I wanted to admit. Hello? The voice on the other end was strange, unfamiliar, and there was an edge to it, low, serious. It felt like a cold draft had blown into the space between us. Is this Adam? The voice asked. Yeah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My heartbeat quickened. There was something about this that didn't feel right. I'm calling on behalf of the local police. There's been an accident involving your family. I froze, the words like a punch to the gut. My body went rigid, the world around me blurring as I tried to process what he was saying. What? What happened? My voice trembled, and I hated how weak it sounded. My mind couldn't keep up with the reality unfolding before me. "Kay, there's been an incident with your mother," the voice continued, cold and calm. "We need you to come down to the station. I can't give you many details over the phone, but it's urgent." The phone felt heavy in my hand, the world around me suddenly spinning. My legs wavered, and I had to grip the stone wall to keep from falling. The phone call blurred into the sound of the rain and my own heartbeat, thumping in my chest like a drum. The words "your mother" echoed in my head. What did he mean by incident? What had happened? I started, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know any aptui tanstris. I started, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know what to say, how to ask. The world outside felt like it was closing in on me. Everything I thought I knew about what was real and what wasn't seemed to vanish in that one moment. "Are you all right?" the voice asked, but I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or just trying to fill the silence. I couldn't answer. I couldn't answer. My mind was already racing, thoughts flooding in, one after another. My mother? An accident? What did that even mean? I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I just ended the call and stood there, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly I thought I might break it. I didn't know what to do next. Kamening Kendinsafen. I looked up at the night sky, watching the rain fall, the city below me alive with lights that seemed so far away. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to feel. The storm had stopped, but the weight of the phone call, the voice, the words still hung in the air around me. Nkana, my legs felt weak as I pushed myself off the wall, stepping out of the shelter of the bridge. The cold bite of the rain still hit my skin, but it didn't matter. Everything felt distant now. Nothing seemed to make sense. My body moved forward like I was on autopilot, but my mind was still back in that moment, back with the voice on the other end of the line. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew something had changed. The streets felt colder, lonelier than they had before. The world around me was quiet, but I could hear my own thoughts racing in the space between the raindrops. My mother, my family, what had happened. I kept walking, the road ahead of me stretching into the unknown. But the question remained heavy in my chest: how much of my life had I missed? How much was I still running from? The sirens came first, a distant wail that grew louder with each passing second. At first, they were just a part of the night, a fleeting noise in the distance. But as they drew closer, I could feel the hairs on my neck stand up. I didn't move. I couldn't. The bridge felt like a cage now, the walls closing in around me as the sound of the sirens filled the air. They were close, too close, and my chest tightened with something I couldn't name. "UK." I took a shallow breath, the cold air biting at my lungs. The rain had slowed, but the tension was still there, thick in the air. I stayed still, half waiting for something. The air under the bridge was thick with the smell of damp earth and cold steel. My feet were rooted in the mud, but my mind was elsewhere, running over the words I'd just heard on the phone, over and over again. A family tragedy. The weight of it settled deeper into my chest, heavy and suffocating. I had tried to walk away, to distance myself from everything, but now it felt like I had been pulled back to the place I had been running from. My family, my life, all the pieces that had been scattered, it all came rushing back at once. I could feel the sirens drawing closer, the sound piercing the night, but I didn't know if I wanted to face what was happening or keep running. I couldn't decide. I wasn't sure if I was ready for either. What did it mean, family tragedy? Was it something I could fix, or was it something that couldn't be undone? The cold of the bridge had settled into my bones. The night had slipped into something darker, something heavier. I didn't know if it was the storm or the thoughts, racing through my mind that had made everything feel off. Either way, it was as if time had stopped. I turned slowly, stepping out from under the bridge, the rain now only a drizzle, like the world was waiting for something. I looked down the empty street, my eyes catching the faint glow of street lamps, their dim light casting shadows on the wet ground. The sirens grew louder, closer. I walked, each step slower than the last, as if the weight of the sirens was pulling me back. My father's car came into view first, parked at the end of the block, the headlights still on, casting long shadows across the pavement. It was the same car I had seen every day of my life. But something about it now felt wrong. It was too still, too quiet. The front door to our house was wide open, the light from the hallway spilling out, casting a faint glow onto the porch. There was no sound, no movement. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. My legs felt heavy as I walked toward the house, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness of the street. The sirens were loud now, too loud, cutting through the air, each wail sending a chill up my spine. Yeah, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The house was still, too still, and the open door, the way it looked like someone had left in a hurry, unsettled me. It didn't make sense. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. I stopped at the edge of the porch, my fingers wrapped tightly around the wooden railing. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, and my mind was racing, pulling me in every direction. My father's voice was still in my head, his angry words from earlier ringing in my ears. A failure to this family. But the weight of those words seemed so small now, insignificant, against the noise of the sirens and the emptiness of the house in front of me. The door swung open again, a breeze pushing it wider, but no one came out. I stayed frozen, watching. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. For me? For someone else? I could feel the cold creeping into my fingers as I held the railing tighter, my eyes darting to the street where the police cars were now visible at the far end. They were coming fast, the lights flashing red and blue, casting erratic shadows across the pavement. My stomach twisted, a cold knot forming in the pit of my stomach. The closer they got, the harder it was to breathe and carry. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to move to make a choice. I could turn around and walk away, keep running, keep ignoring everything. But the sirens were so close now, and the door to my house was wide open, inviting me in, beckoning me to see what had been left behind. I didn't know what to do. The uncertainty hung in the air like smoke, curling around me. My feet felt rooted to the spot, my mind frozen. The house felt like it was waiting, like it was holding on to something. A memory? A secret? Or was it just the weight of everything I had left unsaid, everything I had walked away from? The sirens were so close now that I could hear them more clearly than the sound of my own thoughts. I stepped forward, my feet carrying me without my permission, drawn toward the house like it was the only thing left. The door creaked as it swung wider, as if inviting me in, or perhaps trying to keep me out. I took a breath, slow and steady, but it didn't help. The air felt thick, suffocating, and still there was no sound, no sign of life inside. I stepped into the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. The world outside seemed so far away now, as if I had crossed some invisible line that I couldn't go back from. I stood there in the dark, waiting, unsure of what would come next. I stepped inside and felt it immediately, the stillness thick like the air before a storm. The door clicked shut behind me, but it didn't feel like it was my hand that did it. My feet shuffled across the worn floorboards, the soft creak of each step louder than it should have been in the silence. The light above me flickered once, twice, then stayed dim, casting long shadows across the room. The house, usually filled with the hum of everyday life, felt like a shell, empty, cold. I looked around, but everything was still too still. I stood in the doorway just inside the living room and took it all in. The air felt thick like it was holding its breath. The house looked the same, but everything felt off. The furniture sat in their usual spots, the rug crinkled at the edges, the soft hum of the refrigerator still present in the kitchen. But it was wrong. There was something about it, something that made my stomach turn. The silence seemed to press down on me, heavier than I'd ever felt before. My heart pounded in my chest, a steady rhythm that didn't match the stillness of the house. My eyes flicked toward the hallway, but I didn't move. I didn't want to. It felt like a bad dream, a quiet one where you could feel the weight of everything and nothing at the same time. Dad? I called out, my voice tentative, not wanting to break the silence, but knowing I had to. I didn't get an answer, but I heard something shift, footsteps heavy and slow. I turned to the living room, my pulse quickening. And there he was, standing in the middle of the room, his face ashen, his hands limp at his sides. My father, the man who had always been bigger than life to me, now looked smaller, fragile, like the weight of the world had crushed him down. Dad, I said again, this time louder, but my voice felt foreign to me, distant. He didn't look at me, not at first. His eyes were fixed somewhere beyond me, his gaze unfocused, as if he couldn't even see me standing there. I took a cautious step toward him, my feet hesitant. His gaze finally shifted, landing on me, but it wasn't the same. There was nothing in his eyes, no anger, no frustration, just emptiness. The usual sharpness in his stare was gone. His face, usually full of life, now seemed hollow. I couldn't place the expression. It wasn't fear or sadness or relief, it was just, "Nothing, Dad." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The words had to be said, they had to be said now. His lips parted slightly, as if he were about to speak, but then the words stopped. He just stood there, staring at me. The silence stretched out between us like a canyon, wide and unbreachable. I waited for him to say something, anything, but nothing came. The house felt even more suffocating now. I could feel the air pressing against my skin, cold and heavy. And then I noticed it, the empty space where my mother's presence should have been. She was never far from him, never too far from the house. She was never far from him, never too far from the house. But she wasn't here. Where's Mom? I asked, this time feeling the urgency in my voice. I took another step toward him. Dad, what happened? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked away from me again, his eyes darting toward the hallway. It was like he was trying to avoid saying something, trying to keep the truth buried deep inside. But I had to know. I stepped around him, moving cautiously toward the hallway. The silence hung so thick in the air that I could almost hear the walls breathing. I passed him, feeling the weight of his gaze on my back. The hallway felt like a narrow tunnel, leading me to something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I could hear my own footsteps now, louder in the stillness, echoing off the walls. The door to my mother's room was ajar, but the light inside was off. The room felt colder than it should have been, even though the heater had been running earlier. Okay. I pushed the door open, and there, in the dim light of the hallway, I saw it, the empty bed. The sheets crumpled where she'd been, but nothing more. No sign of her. Not a sound. The room was just as still as the rest of the house, but it felt different. It felt wrong. And I turned back toward the living room where my father stood watching me. He didn't move, Dad. Where is she? What's going on? My voice broke this time, the words scraping at my throat. He didn't answer immediately. His lips were pressed into a thin line, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. And then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he spoke. She's gone, he whispered so quietly that I almost didn't hear him. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. The words didn't make sense. Gone? Where? How? My mind scrambled for an answer, any answer, but nothing made sense. The world felt like it was shifting beneath me, pulling everything out of place. I stood there staring at him, the words echoing in my head. She's gone. The house felt colder now, the silence wrapping itself around me, smothering me. I couldn't breathe. My father didn't move. His eyes were still empty, as if he had no energy left to fight, no reason to explain. I could feel the years of silence and secrets between us, the distance that had been growing between our family, but I had never imagined it would end like this. And I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know where to go. I had walked out of this house hours ago, expecting anger, expecting to feel like a failure, but now all I could feel was confusion. I turned away from him, walking slowly back into the living room, as the weight of it all sank deeper into my chest. The house felt suffocating. Everything felt suffocating. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was thick and heavy. The world was still waiting for something to happen, but I didn't know what. I looked back at my father, standing motionless in the doorway of the living room. His eyes followed me, but he didn't speak. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing my face. The silence followed me. The world outside felt just as empty as the house behind me. I stood there, still in the doorway, the cool air slipping in around me. My father hadn't moved. He hadn't even looked up from his hands, folded on the table in front of him. The house around us felt smaller than it ever had before. Sun ever sire at stals every second. The walls seemed to close in with every second, pressing in on me, squeezing out the air. The house was always full of noise, full of life, full of us, but now it was just silence. It was just silence. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the quiet in here felt heavier than the storm had ever been. And I didn't know how long I stood there. Maybe it was minutes, maybe hours. My mind raced, my thoughts a blur of everything I just heard, everything I couldn't understand. My father's face, so unreadable, so distant. I wanted to shake him, to make him explain, to make him give me something, anything, to hold on to. But he didn't move. I turned back into the living room, the dim light from the table lamp, barely enough to fill the space. I could hear my breath, slow and shallow, but it was the only sound in the room. The air felt dense, thick with unspoken things. I kept glancing at the doorway to the hallway where my mother's room had been. That's where she should have been, for Axir Rinning, but now it was just another empty room, another part of the house that didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. Dad? I asked again, quieter this time, almost as if I were afraid of breaking the silence. He didn't answer, but he shifted in his seat, his hands tightening into fists on the table. He was trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come. It wasn't the first time this had happened. We had always struggled to communicate, to say what needed to be said. But this was different. This was something deeper, darker that none of us had ever spoken aloud. And I took a step closer, the floor creaking under my weight, but my father didn't react. I stood beside him, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming faster now. The room felt suffocating, like it was closing in on me, tightening around me, and I couldn't escape. "You, Dad," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to Mom? Why isn't she here?" His eyes flicked up to mine for the first time since I walked in. They were wide, exhausted, but there was something else there too, something broken. His lips parted, but nothing came out at first. He closed his eyes, the weight of the silence stretching between us. I don't know how to explain it," he muttered, his voice shaky, distant. "I didn't know what I was doing, and man, I didn't know what I was doing. I just didn't want to face it. I didn't want to face any of it." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" He didn't answer right away. He took a slow breath and turned his gaze toward the floor. His hands were trembling now, and I could see that he was struggling to find the right words. The man who had always been so sure, so firm, was breaking before me. "Lakanekakain. I thought I was protecting you," he whispered. "I thought if I kept things from you, kept you safe, that it would keep you from this mess. But I was wrong. I was wrong about everything." His voice broke, the words cracking in his throat. She couldn't take it anymore. I took a step back, confusion swirling through me. Take what? What couldn't she take? My chest was tight, and I felt the weight of everything pressing in, like the walls were suffocating me. The house felt like a tomb. He didn't respond at first. His eyes glazed over, like he was seeing something I couldn't. I could feel the anger rising in me, but more than that, I felt the sting of betrayal. The house that had always been a place of safety, of home, was now a place of secrets. A place of things I hadn't been told. She was involved with some things, he said, the words coming out in broken pieces, things from her past. Things I never knew about, things I never wanted to know. The pieces fell into place, but they didn't make any sense. My mother, I thought I knew her. I thought I knew everything about her. But now it felt like she was a stranger, like she had been hiding something from me, from us, and I didn't know how to handle it. I couldn't breathe. The words he was saying didn't make sense. My mother had been distant lately, yes. But this was something else entirely. The person I thought I knew was slipping away, and the person standing in front of me wasn't the man I had grown up with either. His face was lined with guilt, regret, his hands were shaking, his breath shallow. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice trembling now. "What does that mean? What happened to her?" He didn't look at me. He kept his gaze on the floor, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. It was as if he couldn't find the strength to look me in the eye. "She left," he whispered. "She left him," Maritinam sound. "She left, and I couldn't stop her." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always thought of my family as a unit. We were a team, even when things weren't perfect. But now everything felt like it was crumbling. Pieces of a life I'd known slipping through my fingers. "She left?" I repeated, the word foreign in my mouth. "How, when?" "She just disappeared," he said, his voice barely audible. "A few days ago." I didn't know. I should have known, but I didn't. I didn't ask the right questions. His voice cracked again, and he fell silent, his shoulders shaking as if he were holding back tears. I couldn't make sense of it, the confusion, the betrayal, the hurt. It all tangled up inside of me, knotting my chest so tightly I couldn't breathe. I stood there, unable to speak, as my father's sobs filled the room. The air around us felt heavy, thick with everything that had been left unsaid. The weight of the truth, whatever it was, settled in the room like smoke. I took a slow step back away from him toward the door. My heart was heavy, my thoughts spinning, but there was no clarity. Only the fog of confusion, the sharp sting of everything I thought I knew falling apart. I turned away, walking down the narrow hallway to the front door. The world outside felt cold, distant, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I belonged anywhere. I stepped out onto the porch, the night air cool against my skin. The silence of the house echoed in my ears. I looked back one last time at the darkened windows, the empty space that used to be home. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside was far from over. The storm outside had picked up again. It wasn't just rain anymore. It was wind, heavy and relentless, pushing against the windows like it wanted to break through. The thunder rolled in waves, each one shaking the walls, a constant reminder that everything around me was unraveling. I stood in the living room, staring at my father. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the empty glass in front of him, but it was as if his movements were in slow motion. The world felt suspended, held together only by the air between us, but the silence was louder than any storm. And I couldn't breathe. I hadn't been able to since I stepped through that door. The weight of the house, the past, my father's unspoken words, it was all pressing in on me. The walls felt tighter than they should have been, suffocating me, and I wasn't sure if it was the storm outside or the one raging inside me that made everything feel like it was about to break apart. "Dad," I began, my voice hoarse like I had swallowed broken glass. I took a step closer to him, the floor creaking beneath my feet, but he didn't look up. His eyes were fixed somewhere far away, a place I couldn't reach. It didn't matter that he didn't look at me. I needed answers, and I needed them now. What happened? What really happened? My voice was louder now, sharper than I intended. The words were breaking through the dam I had built up, and I couldn't stop them. The weight of everything, the lies, the silence, it was too much. He flinched slightly, as if my words had physically hurt him. His fingers tightened around the glass, but he didn't speak. The storm outside roared louder, its fury in sync with my own. I couldn't stop the questions. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say anything? My father finally looked up at me, his gaze empty and tired. His face was hollow, drained of all emotion, but his eyes, they were pleading for something I couldn't understand, or maybe something I didn't want to understand. "You don't get it," he muttered, his voice low, hoarse. He stood up slowly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I didn't know how to protect you from this." From the truth, his words hung in the air, heavy with regret. He didn't say it like a confession. He said it like an explanation, and the more he spoke, the more the pieces didn't fit. The more I realized that nothing was as it seemed, nothing had ever been. The foundation of everything I thought I knew was crumbling beneath me. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. My body felt cold, like I had stepped into a world that wasn't my own. The weight of his words, the emptiness in his eyes, made my stomach twist. Everything I thought was solid, everything I had taken for granted, was beginning to slip away. "You lied to me," I whispered. The words felt like they had been buried deep inside me, waiting to be said. "About Mom. About everything. About Mom. At everything. Everything." My father turned away, his back to me now. He stared out the window at the rain pounding against the glass. I could see his shoulders rise and fall with each ragged breath, but still he didn't speak. The silence in the room stretched out, longer than it should have been. I moved toward him, not thinking, just feeling the need to get closer. "You never told me the truth. About her, about what she was hiding." He let out a shaky breath, his head dropping as if he couldn't carry the weight anymore. "I never wanted you to know, son. I thought if I kept it from you, it would protect you." The words felt like a punch. The pain behind them was too much, too real. I stood there, staring at his back, the weight of what he was saying crashing over me. Everything about my life, my family, was a lie. All these years I had been walking through this house thinking I knew who we were. But it wasn't true. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him why, how, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't force them out. Everything I had known about myself, about my place in this world, was slipping away. What was I supposed to do with all of this? I didn't want to burden you with it," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was involved in something I couldn't stop. I tried, but I couldn't protect her from it. And I couldn't protect you." The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I could barely hear him over the storm outside, but his words lingered in the air, hanging like smoke. I couldn't breathe. She was mixed up in something dangerous," he said, his voice trembling now. "I didn't want you to know, but it's all coming out now, isn't it? The past has a way of finding you, no matter how far you try to run." The words were fragments, broken pieces of a puzzle I couldn't make sense of. I reached out, almost instinctively, to steady myself, but there was nothing left to hold on to. The foundation of my life, everything I thought was true, was breaking apart. I took a step back, my mind spinning, my heart heavy with the truth I didn't want to hear. The storm outside had worsened, the thunder crashing louder than before, like the world itself was collapsing. The rain pounded against the windows, relentless, drowning out everything else, but inside it was quieter than ever. My father, standing in front of me, was nothing more than a shadow of the man I thought I knew. I couldn't move, I couldn't think. I could only stand there, staring at the man who had given me life, the man who had just shattered everything I knew. I turned away, my chest tight, my breath shallow. The house around me felt like it was closing in. The walls seemed to bend, the shadows stretching, suffocating me. I had always thought that family meant something solid, something unshakable. But now, everything felt broken. I didn't know where to go or what to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here. Not now, not with everything I had just learned. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside. I stepped toward the door, feeling the cold air from the night pushing against my skin. I didn't look back. Not at my father, not at the house. I just left, the door slamming shut behind me, and the weight of everything that had been said hung over me like a dark cloud. The house felt different now. The air was heavier, as if the walls were holding something in, something I couldn't touch or understand. The storm had passed, but the silence between me and my father was louder than ever. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the empty space between us, the room cold even though the heater was running. His chair, just across from mine, sat empty, too empty. Outside, the last light of the day was fading, leaving the house to fall into darkness. The quiet stretched on, almost suffocating, like the room had been frozen in time. I could feel my chest tightening with every passing second, but I didn't move. I didn't know what I was waiting for, an apology? An explanation? The words I had demanded earlier still hovered in the air, unanswered. And my father was somewhere in the other room, I think. The faint sound of the TV buzzed, muted, the screen flickering in the background, but neither of us had turned it on. I hadn't heard him speak since that moment in the living room after I walked away. Silence was his only response. I looked down at my hands, the way they trembled when I tried to steady them. The weight of everything I had learned today, everything I had felt, pressed down on me, suffocating me more than the storm ever could. I stood up, pacing the floor slowly, feeling the coolness of the tiles beneath my bare feet. The house felt too small, too close, like the walls were inching in on me. It wasn't just the house, it was the world around me. Everything had become unfamiliar, distorted, in a way that I couldn't shake. Every time I tried to process what my father had said, the truth that had come spilling out like dark ink on white paper, I was left with more questions than answers. She was gone in a way I didn't understand, and I was left with nothing but shadows of a past I couldn't reach. I walked back into the kitchen, my feet dragging across the floor. The house felt too empty, too quiet. I could still hear the faint hum of the TV, but it wasn't enough to fill the space between me and the man who had raised me. I opened the fridge, staring into it without really seeing anything, just needing to fill the silence with something. Anything. The cold air rushed up, but the chill didn't settle anywhere. My thoughts were colder than the fridge, colder than the room I was standing in. I pulled out a can of soda, popped the tab, and took a slow sip, trying to ground myself. But nothing felt right. I could hear him moving in the other room, a shuffle of footsteps, the clink of glass. But the distance between us felt wider than any physical space could measure. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, the growing frustration rising like bile in my throat. I walked back into the living room, the bottle still in my hand, but I didn't know what to do with it. He sat in his chair now, his back to me, his face lost in the glow of the TV. The flickering light illuminated his tired features, but it didn't give me anything I could hold on to. The man I had known was slipping away just like my mother. And all I had were these fragments, these broken moments between us that would never heal. I don't understand, I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. Why won't you talk to me? Why won't you tell me what's going on? He didn't turn around. He didn't look up. His hands gripped the arms of the chair like he was holding on to something, but I couldn't tell what. I wasn't even sure he was listening anymore. Please, I whispered, stepping closer. Dad, please. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I need to know. I need you to talk to me. The air between us thickened, the walls growing taller. His silence was more than just avoidance. It was a wall I couldn't climb. No matter how hard I tried, I stood there for a long time, waiting. The TV hummed quietly in the background, and the seconds stretched into minutes, but nothing changed. My father didn't move, didn't speak. The silence roared louder than anything I had ever heard. I could feel the edges of my frustration turning into something darker, something I didn't want to let in. But I couldn't stop it. I'm not a kid anymore, I said, my voice firmer now, pushing through the tension. Ural Kaib. Ye war, I said. I'm not someone you can just keep shutting out. I deserve the truth. We deserve the truth. He finally turned his head just slightly enough to glance at me from over his shoulder. His eyes were glassy, distant, and for the first time I saw how worn he was, how broken. But that didn't soften the anger in my chest. It didn't change the distance between us. "Kay, I never wanted this for you," he said, his voice low, barely a whisper. "I never wanted you to know all this. It's a mess, a damn mess, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." I felt something crack inside me, something I couldn't quite name. His words didn't make anything clearer. They only made everything more confusing. What was he hiding? What had he been keeping from me all these years? "I can't just ignore it," I said, stepping closer, my hands shaking now, but not from fear. "I need to know why she left, why you didn't tell me." Finally turned fully to face me. His eyes were wet, like he had been holding back something for a long time. Something that had finally broken. But I couldn't let it go, not this time. What did she do, Dad? Why did she leave? What's been going on? His breath hitched, and for a moment the silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. The TV was still on, the light flickering, but it felt far away now, distant and unimportant. My father's eyes were hollow, like they had seen too much. Like they had been carrying too much for too long. Some things. You're not ready to hear, he said, his voice barely audible, his head dropping again. But one day you will be. I didn't know what that meant, but I wasn't sure I wanted to know anymore. I took a slow step back, my heart heavy in my chest, the weight of it pressing down harder than anything I'd ever felt before. You can't. I didn't say another word. I couldn't. The walls had grown taller now, taller than I could see, and all I had was the quiet echo of the man I once called father, the silence of everything he had left unsaid. I turned and walked away, not knowing where to go, but knowing I couldn't stay here anymore. The door slammed shut behind me, and the house felt even smaller than before. The streets were empty, just the soft sound of my shoes against the pavement. The world felt oddly still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The night was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes everything seem far away, distant. The city I had grown up in, the same sidewalks, the same corners, now felt like a maze, the paths twisting and turning in ways I didn't recognize. I walked slowly, not sure where I was headed. There was nothing left to guide me, but I kept moving. I didn't know what I was looking for. I thought maybe the streets would offer something, a familiar face, a place that felt like it belonged to me. But the city didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stranger's world, something I was simply passing through. The glow of the streetlights cast long shadows on the ground, and everything around me seemed out of place. Even the air felt different, too still, too empty. I kept walking, each step echoing in the silence. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to prove by being out here. Maybe it was just the need for movement, for something to break the silence I had left behind. I had spent the last few hours with my father, but it didn't feel like we had spoken at all. Words had been said, but there was nothing left in them. Not for me, not for him. I found myself standing at the edge of a park, the place I used to come to think, to clear my head when I was younger. I'd sit on the same bench, watching the world pass by, and I would feel grounded. I'd feel like things were okay, like they were supposed to be. But today, standing there, I felt nothing but a hollow ache. The park was still and empty, the benches just empty spaces, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. I sat down on the same bench, the worn wood creaking under my weight. The cool breeze blew across my face, but it didn't bring any relief. I felt the weight of the night, the weight of everything that had happened, the words my father had said, the silence that had followed them. They lingered in the air, thick and heavy, suffocating me in ways the storm outside never could. The world around me was familiar, but I couldn't recognize it. The streetlights flickered, casting strange, erratic shadows across the grass. I could hear the distant sound of a car passing, the faint hum of life that seemed so far away. But here, in this moment, it felt like I was outside of it all, like I was watching the world through a window, unable to touch it. I thought about going back, about returning to the house, but the idea felt like a weight I couldn't carry. The house wasn't home anymore. It was just four walls and the ghosts of people who had been torn apart by things unsaid, things hidden, things that would never be the same. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to steady myself. I wanted to believe that things could go back to normal, that I could walk in the door and everything would be fine. But I knew it wasn't. The world had shifted, and so had I. The places that used to offer comfort felt hollow, like they were just echoes of something I used to know. I stood up, my legs feeling stiff from sitting too long. The park had nothing left to offer me. Nothing felt like it belonged to me anymore. I walked back toward the street, my mind a blur, my steps slow and unsure. The city around me had become a maze, the familiar streets twisting in ways I couldn't understand. It felt like a different place, a place where I didn't fit. I glanced around, looking for something, anything, that would bring back the sense of certainty I used to feel. But it wasn't there. The silence hung heavy on the streets, like the world was waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The rain had stopped, but the dampness in the air lingered. It wasn't the same. I walked past the old diner where I used to meet my friends after school. The neon lights flickered, casting a soft glow on the sidewalk, but the windows were dark. It was closed. Everything was closed. The familiar places didn't feel familiar anymore. They felt like memories I couldn't touch. The streets felt like a place I was just passing through, not a place that had ever been mine. My feet carried me home without thinking, the weight of the night pressing in on me. and I found myself standing in front of the house again. The door was locked, but it wasn't the door that had kept me out. It was the distance, the silence, the things I didn't know and the things I didn't want to face. Yugen come ta. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at the door. The light from the street lamps cast a faint glow over the porch, but it didn't feel like the same house I had left earlier. The house that once held warmth, the house where I had grown up, was now a place I didn't recognize. The walls felt colder, the door a barrier that I wasn't sure I could cross. I turned away without knocking, without even thinking about it, and I didn't know where I was going, only that the house wasn't where I needed to be right now. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my feet, the sound hollow in the night. The streets around me were quiet, but the weight of the silence was louder than anything, and I felt like I was walking away from something I couldn't get back. The distance between me and the life I used to know was growing wider with each step, but I didn't know where to turn. I just kept walking, not knowing what the next step would bring, but knowing that I couldn't stop. The storm had passed, but the darkness felt like it would never end. The house felt colder when I stepped inside. The front door creaked as it closed behind me, and the silence that followed was thick, almost oppressive. I paused, standing in the dim light of the entryway. The house seemed familiar, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The walls that had once held laughter and arguments now felt empty, hollow. My father was somewhere in the house, but the space between us stretched further than the distance I had walked to get here. The clock on the wall ticked each second louder than the last. Kent, the quiet weighed on me as I moved through the hallway. I could feel the distance in the air, like it had settled between us long before I left, before everything fell apart. The echoes of our words still lingered, but they weren't enough to fill the silence now. Every step I took felt heavy, like the weight of the past was following me, pulling me down. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to start. The house was the same, but I wasn't sure I was. I wasn't sure we were. My father's presence, once a source of strength, now felt like a shadow, distant, unreachable. I hadn't seen him since the night I left, and though I was standing in his house, in his space, it was like we were still miles apart. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and dust, the remnants of a life that had once been full. I walked toward the living room, each footfall slow and deliberate, as if I could somehow delay whatever was coming next. I found him sitting in the chair by the window, the same spot where he always sat. His eyes were fixed on something outside, but he didn't seem to see it. The light from the window cast soft shadows across his face, making him look smaller than I remembered. His hands were folded in his lap, the same hands that had held me, that had struck fear in me, and now they were empty. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, not sure whether to step forward or retreat. The silence between us felt like a barrier, thick and unmovable. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. What was there to say? The things I wanted to say, the things I needed to say, felt too big for the space between us. Finally, he shifted, his gaze moving slowly toward me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something in them that wasn't anger, wasn't guilt. It was loss, a quiet, empty kind of loss. "Son," he whispered, his voice thick like it hadn't been used in a while. He looked at me like he wasn't sure how to start either. "I'm sorry." The words were soft, but they hit me like a punch. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't enough, it wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was all he could say. And it felt like it was all we had left. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to run to him and tell him everything would be okay. I wanted to feel the weight of his arms around me like I had when I was younger, like nothing in the world could touch us. But as I took a step closer, something inside me recoiled. I froze, unsure of what I was feeling. A mix of anger, fear, confusion. His hand lifted slightly, almost as if to touch me, but I couldn't let him. The space between us felt too wide, too deep. He saw the hesitation in my eyes, and for a moment we just stood there, both of us trapped in the same silent understanding. We couldn't bridge the gap that had opened between us, and neither of us knew how to close it. "I don't know what to say," I finally whispered, the words coming out raw. "I don't know how to fix this." "Cat." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The air between us spoke louder than any words could. He knew. I knew. Everything had changed. We were different now. I naper papasapasasper. I knew. Everything had changed. We were different now. We were fractured like the pieces of a puzzle that couldn't fit together anymore. I glanced down at the floor, my hands trembling at my sides. I wanted to believe that there was some way back, some path to healing, but I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure if we could come back from this. I took a step back, my heart heavy in my chest. The space between us had grown too large, too full of things I didn't know how to say. The walls were thicker now, built by years of silence, years of avoiding the truth. I didn't know if we could ever tear them down. His eyes followed me as I stepped toward the door. He didn't move, didn't say anything. The quiet hung in the room like a thick fog, the kind that never really lifts. I reached the door, my hand on the knob, and for a brief moment, I thought about turning around, about telling him that everything would be okay, but the words didn't come. I couldn't promise him something I didn't believe myself. I opened the door, the cool air from the outside rushing in, and I stepped out into the night. The world felt the same, but it wasn't. Nothing was the same. I left the door open behind me, but I didn't look back. The rain had finally stopped. The street outside was wet, dark pools of water reflecting the dim streetlights. The air smelled fresh, almost like a promise of something new, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lingering, waiting. I stood at the edge of the porch, looking out into the night. The stillness felt wrong. The silence, like it was holding its breath, was too thick, too heavy. My hand rested on the railing, the cool wood smooth beneath my fingertips. I had stood here so many times before, but tonight it felt different. The house behind me felt far away, and yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. The decision was too big, too heavy. I was standing on the threshold, caught between two worlds. One behind me, the broken house, the fractured family. The other in front of me, a future that seemed distant, uncertain. The rain had stopped, but inside me the storm still raged. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I had never been here before. There were no maps, no signs to guide me. Everything I had known had been broken down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the fragments of a life I wasn't sure I recognized. My father's words still echoed in my head, his face haunted by guilt, by silence. My mother's absence weighed heavily on me. Not just physically, but emotionally. Could I rebuild? Could I move forward? Or was I meant to stay here, picking up the broken pieces, trying to make something whole again? But how do you rebuild something when the foundation is gone? I had never been one for making decisions. But tonight, it seemed like it was all I could do. The street was quiet. The house was quiet. My heart was loud. I turned and looked back at the house, the light from the hallway casting a pale glow in the dark. The door was ajar, like it was waiting for me to step back inside. But it wasn't the house I was afraid of anymore. It was the weight of everything that had happened here, everything I had learned, everything I had lost. I stepped off the porch and into the yard, my feet sinking slightly into the damp grass. The cold air wrapped around me, but it didn't feel cold enough. Nothing felt cold enough to quiet the heat in my chest. The decision felt suffocating, like I couldn't breathe under the weight of it. I could leave. I could walk away and try to rebuild my life, start fresh somewhere else. But what would I be leaving behind? What if I couldn't escape it? The past had a way of following me. It had followed me here, to this house, to this moment. Even as I stood there, I could feel the weight of everything that had happened, the silence, the unspoken truths. The fight with my father, the missing pieces of the puzzle, the fractured relationship I could never repair. Could I really walk away from everything? Could I leave my father behind, leave the pain, and try to find something new? Was there any point in staying? Could I heal here? Or was I doomed to be caught in the same cycle, the same pain, over and over again? I turned back toward the house, my footsteps slow, measured. The decision didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like a weight I had to carry, whether I stayed or went. I reached for the door, my fingers brushing the cool metal handle, and then stopped. I didn't want to go inside. Not yet, not with everything still hanging between us. I needed space to think. I needed to make sense of everything that had happened. I took a deep breath and pulled the door shut behind me, leaving the house behind once again. I walked down the driveway, my footsteps soft against the pavement. The night was still, the world around me quieter now, as if everything was waiting. There were no answers out there, I knew that, but I didn't know where else to go. I just needed time. Time to think, to make the choice that had been hanging over me for so long. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt thick, heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. And I stopped at the end of the driveway, looking up at the sky, watching the stars peek through the clouds. The air felt clearer now, but the storm inside me hadn't passed. I stood there for what felt like hours, just breathing, trying to make sense of everything. My father's face, my mother's absence, the house that wasn't home anymore. The streets that felt foreign, the world I didn't belong to. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. What was the right thing to do? I wanted to move on, but how could I leave everything behind? Could I leave? I didn't have an answer, not yet. But the choice felt inevitable, like it was already made, only I hadn't caught up to it. The night stretched on, and I stood there, waiting for the world to tell me what to do. But it didn't. It was silent, just like the house, just like everything that had happened. And I knew that, whatever I decided, I would have to face it alone.